I could not be more angry right now. It's time for us to stand up with one voice for the trans community.
Trump is going to war with trans activists, and things are getting intense. We're going to break this down and so much more on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, our politics, and our media, all from an independent perspective. Up first, like I mentioned, Trump just picked a fight with trans activists over one of the most contentious issues related to transgender rights, which is the medical transitioning of gender-confused minors. Trump's executive order is titled Protecting Children from Chemical and Surgical Mutilation, and while we'll get into all the details, just generally speaking, it seeks to leverage federal insurance programs and federal funding to end the practice nationwide or severely curtail it of medically transitioning minors, which typically includes anything from puberty blockers starting at 10 or 11 to cross-sex hormones and so that they go through the opposite sex's puberty or something like it. And in some cases, in the later teen years, even gender surgeries that involve, for example, double mastectomies, removing healthy breast tissue of females who identify as trans and want to appear more masculine. This is the kind of thing we're talking about. It's incredibly controversial, and so is this order. The left-wing LGBTQ rights activist organization, the Human Rights Campaign, slammed this as a, quote, disturbing attempt to put the federal government between families and their doctors. Some of the reactions online, though, were decidedly less measured. For example, a popular left-wing account called Onion Person wrote, "This might not be politically correct and possibly even offensive, but if you voted for and support an HRT ban, referring to hormone therapy, at any age, I hope you live a very short life." Oh? More than 8,000 people liked that post, guys. And the follow-up tweet read, "This is quite possibly one of the most evil acts taken by Republicans in a long time. We gotta throw them all in prison for life for this." We might be operating under different definitions of evil there. Another prominent transgender activist named Caitlin Burns wrote that this order will kill kids. There's no other way to say it. It's the government forcibly taking control of the bodies of thousands of children. That's an interesting way to frame it. We have all sorts of restrictions on what minors are and aren't allowed to do, like age of consent laws, for example, and nobody views that as the government taking control of children's bodies. As for the claim that it will kill kids, this is completely unsubstantiated and alarmist. It echoes a refrain we've heard from a long time from trans activists that this is life-saving care, but this has always been deeply misleading. There is no, and I repeat, no, quality research demonstrating or proving to any extent that these treatments reduce in transgender identifying youth. As the journalist Benjamin Ryan clarified on Twitter, the claim that prescribing puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones prevents suicide deaths is not supported by research, a fact acknowledged by ACLU litigator Trace Strangio before the Supreme Court last month. Only one study has ever directly assessed whether cross-sex hormones are tied to a difference in the suicide death rate among gender-distressed youths. The study found no such association. Journalists should not parrot the claim that these treatments save lives or that withholding them will kill children just because these claims have been repeated so many times. It seems like they are evidence-based. They are not. Oh, you mean to tell me that left-wing activists and journalists are parroting claims that aren't true to foment panic over something Donald Trump is doing? No way. Couldn't be. Now, we're going to get into the reaction to this order that's kind of wild coming out of some Democratic members of Congress. But first, a quick message from today's sponsor. I don't know about you guys, but I ate way too much over the holidays and gained a few extra pounds. But I'm getting my health back on track, and that's why I'm excited to share today's sponsor, Lumen, which is a great way to increase your energy levels, feel better, and lose weight. Lumen is a device that measures your metabolism through your breath, and on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs, and even gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and even stress management. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on with your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. Your metabolism is your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food you eat into fuel that keeps you going. Mastering your metabolism will help you get your health back on track in 2025. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/Brad to get 20% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/Brad for 20% off your purchase. Check it out today. You'll be glad you did. All right, like I mentioned, this is obviously not being received well by people on the Democratic side of the aisle who've unfortunately kind of gone all in that their party position is supporting sex changes for minors. Here's a video from Democratic Congresswoman Becca Balint.
So I just saw Trump's executive order concerning gender-affirming care for minors. And can I just say what we're talking about is health care for kids. Healthcare that their parents want to get them so that they are healthy and safe and alive. And I could not be more angry right now about this executive order and Trump interfering into the lives of my constituents and their families who are just trying to get them the health care that they need and deserve. So it's time for us to stand up with one voice for the trans community.
Respectfully, Congresswoman, just because you're angry doesn't mean you are correct. And you are repeating falsehoods and misleading narratives here. Like I mentioned, there's no evidence substantiating that these treatments reduce suicide or anything like that. So when we're talking about saving lives, that is demagogic, not rooted in evidence. And I'm sympathetic to the argument that parents should be left to make decisions about their kids, but we've all always agreed that there is some limit to that. For example, many of these same Democrats, and I agree with them on this, want legislation and have supported legislation to prohibit anti-gay conversion therapy for minors. But you could just as easily say that's the government controlling a minor's body, getting in between the parents and their doctor, or whatever. But obviously, we all agree there are limits. And the only question is whether you think that these treatments, this medical transitioning of minors, is beyond the pale of those reasonable limits. And I do, and so do many other Americans. Part of the reason why we feel that way is because despite what activists have repeated and insisted over and over again, and some U.S. health expert organizations have decided to embrace, even though it's really not true, there is not good evidence supporting these treatments as safe or effective for minors. That has been the conclusion reached by expert reviews across the world, from the United Kingdom to other European countries where many of these protocols originated. You don't have to take my word for it. I will link to the sources, but systemic reviews have repeatedly found inadequate evidence supporting puberty blockers and hormones for gender distress among minors. So many of us, coming from a good place, do not want minors to be able to go through these unproven treatments that can have lifelong ramifications in terms of a lack of fertility or a lack of proper sexual functioning that I don't think minors can truly understand and consent to the lifelong ramifications of some of those things. And given that the treatments are so unsubstantiated by evidence, it's entirely reasonable to want to prohibit them until people are adults and can decide for themselves. And that's the thrust of what Trump's order is trying to do, though the details get a little bit complicated. Overall, I support the goal. I've been on record for a long time saying I want to restrict these treatments to adults, and I support their right. It's their life, it's their body, do with it what you will, but minors, I don't think, can truly understand this stuff. So look, whether it's Trump, whether it's state level lawmakers, I support this goal of restricting this stuff to minors. And I have before that view was popular. I was saying this back in 2018 or 2019 when that got me canceled, attacked, and pushed out of an all-gay men's soccer club. And I got lots of backlash for it. Now it's become a more popular view and a lot more people are on board and welcome. But like some of us have been saying this. That said, I do have some questions and concerns about Trump's executive order. For one, I'm not a lawyer and I really can't speak to the legality of this, whether he can really just do this all via executive order without legislation or anything. It will face legal challenges and it could get blocked. The other problem with doing this by executive order is that even if this was successful and this order managed to curtail the practice nationwide, doing stuff by executive order means that the second a Democratic president comes back into the office, so say in 4 years is possible, they can just flip the switch and boom, allow it again. Or even potentially use some of the mechanisms like funding that Trump is trying to use to force places to prohibit the practice. I fear that if Trump does this, couldn't a Democrat president do the opposite and say, we'll defund hospitals and medical schools in your state if they don't allow this, if they don't offer these treatments? So then the red states that have prohibited it would be put between a rock and a hard place, the same way Trump is trying to do to blue states right now. And I agree with the objective of Trump and not of the blue states, but I do worry about this kind of federal attempt to pressure every state into one position on this issue, because obviously if Republicans can do it, Democrats can do it as well. That said, some of the stuff in this order is just incredibly commonsensical, like finally instructing the federal government to stop listening to and forming policy recommendations based on the advice of WPATH, which is a pseudoscientific health group that supposedly makes the expert recommendations about transgender care, but is actually comprised of activists, not just doctors or scientists, and puts out really insane takes and recommendations. For example, they've recommended no age requirements, no age minimums on many of these treatments, and then even endorsed bizarre things that have literally no evidence in support of them whatsoever, like giving non-binary people gender nullification surgeries where you cut off their private parts and smooth them over like a Ken doll. Seriously. They've endorsed that, and this is a scientific group. Trump is right. The federal government should not be taking its cues from these crazy activists. They've been really exposed by reporting into the group. It is not a scientific institution. It is a pseudoscientific activist organization, so he's right to cut ties with them. And I think some of the other changes that Trump is making, like, for example, cutting off coverage for medically transitioning minors from federal insurance programs, assuming he has the authority to do that unilaterally, which I guess I'll have to leave that to the lawyers. I don't know enough to say. That makes sense. Federal insurance shouldn't be funding unproven treatments on minors. That said, there are some parts of this order that make me raise an eyebrow, and I'm not sure how well they'll work out or if they fully make sense. One of those being that the order seems to cover minors as defined to up to 19. So 18-year-olds are counted as minors. And I asked about this on Twitter, and some people suggested that this is because Medicaid will count 18-year-olds as minors for insurance purposes, or other kind of health policies by the federal government count 18-year-olds as minors. But while I do understand that if that's true, why that would be relevant here, I feel like we're confusing something important as a society. Are 18-year-olds adults or are they not? We have all sorts of hodgepodge. They can do some things, but not others. They can sign up to go die in the military, but can't consent to taking hormone pills. Like, to me, if you're an adult, you're an adult, and you should have free choice and will over your body and your life. And if you're a minor, you're a minor. And maybe we've decided that with what we know about developing brain science, that the age of adulthood needs to be raised. Maybe it needs to be 19 or 20 or 21. I'm not against that concept, but I think we need to have a consistent standard. And then once people are legal adults, they should be free to do what they want. So the inconsistency here bothers me a little bit when it comes to 18-year-olds being included, even though I guess it might make sense if that's relevant to the federal policies at play here. And then there's another part of this order that gives me some pause. It reads, in consultation with Congress, work to draft, propose, and promote legislation to enact a private right of action for children and the parents of children whose healthy body parts have been damaged by medical professionals practicing chemical and surgical mutilation, which should include a lengthy statute of limitations. I have some concerns about that because, to be clear, at the time when these procedures were being carried out, the hormones, the puberty blockers, doctors across this country, it was totally legal for them to give this care, and it's what the medical authorities that they looked to for guidance told them was substantiated by the evidence, was the proper treatment protocol, and what they're supposed to do to treat these kids. Now, that might have been wrong, but is it really fair to sue and destroy individual doctors who just followed the rules and gave out these treatments that the American Academy of Pediatricians said were the proper protocol, to me, that's not necessarily fair. You can already sue people for malpractice. For example, if they weren't following the guidelines, if they didn't give proper scrutiny before giving this out, if they were somehow negligent in some way, you can already sue them for malpractice. But it seems unfair for people to be able to sue doctors who completely followed the rules and proper protocols at the time. That part of the executive order, though, is more just a recommendation for something Congress should do. It doesn't actually have any real-world impact right now. All in all, I'm not quite sure whether this order will fully withstand legal challenges. I don't know if every single part of it's going to work out, but look, the tide has shifted against the practice of medically transitioning minors and putting them through irreversible changes they can't understand based on scientifically unsupported notions about the best way to treat gender dysphoria. To me, that's a good thing. And the sooner we can end some of the barbaric practices that have happened in this field of medicine, the better. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. I always take the time to read the comments and like hearing you guys out. And do make sure to subscribe if you aren't yet, and do hit that like button while you're at it. And now, we got to talk about an incident that is happening right here in my home state of Michigan and has me feeling like society is cooked. Like, it's finito, it's over, it's done, because this stuff sounds like beyond parody, but we're living in an upside down world. I can't... We're going to talk about a rapper named Dank DeMoss who is suing Lyft because a driver didn't allow her in their small car because she is, estimating here, about 600 pounds. Now she's claiming her human rights have been violated, and the crazy part is she might actually win this lawsuit. Buckle up and get ready to board the train to the land of Delulu with me as we take a look at some reporting from local news outlet Fox 2.
A Detroit rapper is going viral for something other than her music.
Fans know her as Dank DeMoss, and they're fuming after a Lyft driver allegedly denied her a ride because of her size.
Well, it all unfolded on video. Deja Banlane whipped out her phone when this all happened. Now, the Lyft driver, he was kind enough and apologetic, but refused her a ride and said that she would not fit and that her weight couldn't be handled by his tires. Now she's filing a lawsuit.
Have you been in cars that size before?
Yes, I have. I've been in cars smarter than that, you know.
Deja Blanding tells us she was just trying to get to a Detroit Lions watch party this month when her Lyft rolled up.
As I'm walking, I see him like making faces or whatever. I'm like, oh man.
She already knew.
I can fit in this car.
No, believe me, you can.
Yes, I can.
Believe me.
He told her there's not enough room in his car.
The kicker part was when he started to talk about his tires. You know, I feel like that was a slap in the face. That was like my tires, you know, like.
The driver said his tires could not handle her weight.
For every big person you turn down because they can't fit in your car?
Yeah, because they need to order the Uber XL.
You know what? I don't never have to order Uber XL.
He apologized, canceled the ride, and left her there. The rapper says she's pretty tough.
I get the money and flip it and make time food.
Dank DeMoss, as she's known at the mic, is crushed by the whole situation.
I just want them to know, like, it really hurt my feelings.
Okay, maybe I'm just a heartless villain, but I really don't feel bad for her. She got the ride refunded, it didn't take her money, and she can just order another one to come pick her up. It's not like she got stranded somewhere. And yeah, this woman is not slightly chubby. This woman is not obese. This woman has her own zip code. She's gotta be 500 or 600 pounds. So I don't think it's the craziest thing in the world that she should be expected to get an Uber XL, which costs a few dollars more, but it's like a SUV. It's a bigger car she can comfortably fit in. Because imagine if this guy's truly driving a small sedan. I mean, and he has some luggage in it. He weighs 200 pounds. A 600-pound addition could put you over the weight limit for a car, which I was Googling of that size. A small car might be 800, 850 pounds. Like, that is not crazy. And what if she gets stuck in his back seat and they have to call the fire department and like cut her out of the seats or something? Like, this could be something he's had an issue with before. And I don't think he's crazy or a villain for doing what he did. I just don't. And if I was her, personally, I would be less concerned with my hurt feelings because I had to call a different Uber driver, and a lot more concerned with my impending death from extreme morbid obesity. Like, that is going to send you to an early grave, almost certainly. It will shave years and years off your expected lifespan. That's tragic. And I genuinely want her to get help and do better and live a stronger life, because I'm sure in many ways she's a lovely and beautiful person who has family who care about her, who has friends, who apparently makes music. I'm not really a rap person. I hadn't heard of her. Makes music a lot of people enjoy. So she should be around for as long as possible. But that simply will not happen at 600 pounds. And it is not kind to enable people and coddle them about that basic fact. But the craziest thing is that she might actually win this lawsuit, because according to the news reporting, and I confirmed this with some research, Michigan, where I live, is the only state in the country that has weight as a protected class akin to race. Here's some more of that news coverage.
Looks like Lyft might be hurting pretty soon, too.
I knew it was illegal and I knew that it was wrong.
Her attorneys, John Marco and Zach Runyon, say weight is a protected characteristic in Michigan by law.
It would be no different than a driver pulling up and saying, I don't want to have black people in my car, or I don't want to have Christians in my car or Muslims in my car. It's the same. Under the law, it's the same.
The lawsuit is filed. Since she posted the encounter on social media, other full-figured folks have reached out saying the same thing happened to them.
I can fit in this car.
No, believe me, you can.
Yes, I can. I really want people to see like what we go through as bigger people,
Not the full-figured folks. The euphemisms. What are we going to say next? High-calorie humans? Like, they're fat people. It's okay to refer to them as fat people. That's just a statement of fact. Shouldn't bully them. You shouldn't demean them. But we don't need to twist ourselves in pretzels to not say the obvious. And I'm sorry, but I did a double take when I heard this attorney say that it's the same thing as somebody pulling up and saying, no black people in my car. No, sir, it is not. At least not morally and ethically. I'm not a lawyer. I can't fully speak to the law, but people can't choose their skin color. They can't choose their race. That is an immutable characteristic about them, something they didn't choose and can't change. That's not how being morbidly obese works. That's not true for people who are, again, we're not talking about 10 or 20 pounds overweight here, morbidly obese. There are some extreme rare exceptions. I want to acknowledge that, to be nuanced, where people have unique thyroid conditions or other things that make it almost impossible to not be overweight, but that is a small fraction of a percentage of the people who are 400, 500, 600 pounds. In most cases, in the vast majority of cases, that is a product of their decisions. And I can have compassion for maybe whatever emotional challenges or duress might lead them to make those bad decisions, but we should not. It's actually offensive and just wrong to conflate that with discriminating against people for something like being gay or being black that is not a choice and can't be changed. Treating people differently because of their choices and the product of those choices is something we do all the time and basically shouldn't be illegal. But apparently legislators in Michigan feel differently. Now the courts will have to figure out whether that actually applies to something like Lyft. That'll depend on the specific language of the law. But to me, the fact that that's even a conversation, that this is even a lawsuit somebody thinks they can win, says something about how far off course society has gotten. What happened to any sense of personal responsibility or accountability? Has victim culture really gotten this out of control? Stuff like this demoralizes me and makes me feel like we are cooked. And the massive health crisis that is obesity in America is not going to be fixed or resolved through this type of coddling and cultural insanity. That's just my take on a unique situation from a unique woman who, I'll give her this, seems confident.
I be feeling like I can do everything. So when I walk in the gym, I feel like I'm I'm fit. Shit, I be going in the gym in front of all those people, 500 pounds in shorts, no shirt. Well, I have on a sports bra, but you know.
What do you guys think of this story and this whole ordeal? Do you side with her or Lyft? Let me know in the comments, and do hit that like button while you're at it. And now we got to check in on the federal government, because Washington, D.C. is beyond parody at this point. Trump is working with Elon Musk and Doge, his Department of Government Efficiency, to try to downsize the massive federal bureaucracy, right? We have all these sprawling 3-letter agencies, huge civilian workforce. A lot of it is probably unnecessary and could be chipped away at, but it's very hard because of entrenched protections to actually fire people who work for the federal government, even if they are working to sabotage the president's agenda because they're, hardcore Democrats, or even if they are pretty incompetent. It's very hard. There's extensive protection. So they're kind of trying to do this, but facing headwinds. And some of those headwinds are hilarious, but also mind-boggling. They're trying to offer employees a payout to basically resign, because if they resign, it's much easier to not fill that position and just leave it empty than it is to fire someone in a job that you think is useless and want to eliminate. It's hard to fire them, but if you can get them to resign, you can just not refill the job. And that's probably a more effective way of trying to downsize the federal workforce. So they sent out this very generous offer that basically anybody could take I think 8 months of paid leave as like a resignation package. And now they're getting sued because they emailed federal employees. I'm not joking. I'm not making this up. Federal bureaucrats are suing the Trump administration, claiming that being emailed by the people at the top of the federal government violates their rights as federal employees. No, I did not hit the crack pipe this morning. I am not hallucinating. This is a real thing that's happening. Take a listen to some news coverage.
Federal workers now sounding the alarm over privacy concerns, and a new lawsuit now claims the Trump administration has set up an email distribution system for the entire federal workforce. So they're now concerned about what this means for workers' private data. The lawsuit accuses the U.S. Office of Personnel Management of failing to be able to do an assessment required by federal law to mitigate any privacy risks, and how the new system is collecting data of federal employees. And
if you don't stop them from doing this, future harm will occur. Two things which I clearly agree with, but this goes back to government doesn't work like this. There are rules in place so things like this don't happen, so that you're not exposing the hundreds of thousands of government employees to unneeded exposure by creating and implementing a new system that hasn't been properly vetted.
Y'all, I feel like I'm being punked. They're saying it will do harm and violates the rights of federal employees that they got emails sent out from the top of the federal government to the whole federal workforce, and that they created a new system to email all the people that work for the government. Am I just missing the part that harms anyone or violates their privacy? They're just saying oh, well, what if they get hacked? I mean, they can always be hacked. That doesn't make sense to me. And what kind of vulnerable data are they getting from you by sending you an email and potentially having you reply? What data are, maybe I'm just not up on cybersecurity, but that seems like a stretch to me. The real issue here is apparently that the federal government can't just email its own employees without going through an elaborate system, apparently under law. The Federal News Network reports that the 2002 E-Government Act requires agencies to complete a, quote, privacy impact assessment for any new online federal system by analyzing how personally identifiable information will be collected, stored, protected, shared, and managed within that system. Agencies are required to make the assessment public unless it would raise concerns with national security or reveal classified information. People have a right to know where their information is being stored by the government and how well it's being protected. Bro, what? So the federal government, under law, is required to go through a whole assessment process, which, knowing the federal government as well as I do, I imagine would involve quite a process, a length of time, meetings, drafting of reports, review periods, just to email its own employees in a bulk email. And y'all wonder why the government can't do shit properly, why it can't get the things done that we ask it to do, why there's a demand from the public for a Department of Government efficiency in the first place. That's what was so wild to me about this story, that these federal employees really thought they were doing their big one, thought they were like sticking it to Trump and Elon Musk, like, ha, you can't do that. You can't email us, even though you're our boss. But ironically, this whole thing proves the point of why they're doing this and why it's important in the first place. And that is just chef's kiss. But what do you guys think? Can you believe this is a real thing, a real federal law? I have to say, while I'm slightly horrified, I'm not particularly surprised. That'll be it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, guys. Thank you so much to everybody who's tuning in, including all the new people. We're growing so fast. Thanks again to today's sponsor, Lumen. Do hit that like button before you go. Do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet, and do comment with your thoughts. Love hearing what you guys have to say. With that, we'll talk again real soon.